Have you ever wanted to get revenge on an internet creep who just wouldn't leave people alone? Well, this is the story of how my ex-girlfriend and I convinced a predator to snort baking soda. Twice. This happened back in 1999, in the Wild West days of the early internet. And trust me when I say, this guy absolutely had it coming. But to understand how satisfying this revenge was, we need to go back to a time before social media, before moderation, before anyone even thought about internet safety. A time when the web was truly, dangerously unregulated. This story takes place in the autumn of 1999, during the very early days of the internet as most people know it. This was before Facebook, before Twitter, before YouTube even existed. We're talking about the absolute stone age of online communication. Back then, HTML-coded chat rooms were becoming incredibly popular. For those of you who didn't experience this era, let me paint you a picture of what these chat rooms were like. They were, in today's terms, what you might call the pinnacle of free online speech. And I don't mean that in a good way. These chat rooms were completely, 100% unmoderated. There were no administrators, no moderators, no one watching what was happening. They didn't log any personal data. You didn't have to register an account or provide an email address or verify your identity in any way. Using these chats was extremely basic. You just opened the website, typed in whatever screen name you wanted to use for that session, and boom, you were in. That's it. No password, no verification, nothing. This meant that anyone who wanted to be a creep, abusive, or toxic could do so without any real-life consequences whatsoever. And believe me, people took full advantage of this anonymity. The harassment was constant and relentless. Young women and girls were especially targeted by predators who would use the whisper function, basically the old-school version of direct messages. You'd still be typing in the main group chat, but only the specific person you whispered to could see your message. The typical playbook for these creeps was pretty straightforward. They'd whisper to young women, start conversations, try to seem friendly and normal, and then push to exchange email addresses to keep in touch. Once they had your email, lo and behold, you'd receive low-resolution inappropriate images. This was the era of dial-up internet, so even sending a single image took forever, but these creeps were dedicated. Because these chat rooms were completely unmoderated, we users had to figure out ways to protect ourselves and moderate the spaces ourselves. The most common solution was to create online communities on separate websites, usually using the name of the particular chat room where you hung out. Our community was built around a chat room called the Attic. Since there was no registration system for the chat itself, membership in our protective community was granted differently. You had to be an active participant in the chat and be endorsed by an existing member who could vouch for you. It was basically like a secret society, but for staying safe online. Our community website had several key features. We maintained member lists containing our various nicknames. We had a bulletin board where we warned each other about known creeps, posting their screen names and tactics. We had lists of rules for how to behave, basically early internet etiquette before that was even a term. We supported each other and shared strategies for dealing with harassment. One of our most effective tactics for dealing with creeps was coordination. When we identified someone harassing members, we'd organize in the chat and simultaneously send hundreds of whisper messages to them. We'd all copy and paste the same wall of repetitive text over and over, flooding their screen with messages that only they could see. About 95% of creeps gave up when we did this because the flood of messages would overwhelm their connection. Remember, this was dial-up internet. If you got hundreds of messages at once, your entire connection would slow to a crawl or just crash completely. Our Attic community became known as the safest place among all these chat rooms. We had a reputation for protecting our members and dealing with creeps swiftly and effectively. But some creeps were slippery. About 5% of them were smart enough or patient enough to fly under the radar. They'd pretend to be normal users, gain trust, and still manage to trick victims into sharing personal information. It was a constant battle, and we had to keep coming up with new, creative, and often very funny ways to combat these predators. Let me introduce you to the main players in this story. At the time, I was 20 years old, and my girlfriend was 21. We met through an actual physical meetup that was organized by our online community. Yes, we actually met up in real life. Our community would organize meetups once or twice per year. Members would travel from all over the country just to meet up for a weekend. We'd party, go to amusement parks, or just hang out and do fun stuff together. It was like summer camp, but for internet people. My girlfriend was one of the very first members of the addict community. She was extremely well known in the chat for being tough, clever, and incredibly creative when dealing with creeps. There was a standing joke in the community that she was more evil than the devil himself when it came to trolling predators. She had a reputation. When creeps learned they were dealing with her, they usually left immediately. She was feared, and rightfully so. Now let me introduce you to the antagonist of our story. We'll call him Farmer Bob. Farmer Bob was one of those slippery creeps I mentioned. He was patient and careful. He actually managed to become a member of our protective community without any of us suspecting a thing. He played the long game, acting normal and friendly for weeks or even months. His creepiness was very low-key at first. He didn't immediately start harassing people. Instead, he built up trust and relationships first. It was actually pretty calculated when you think about it. But eventually, some of the younger members of our community started reporting that they were getting emails and unwanted messages from someone. The pattern matched, the tactics matched, and we eventually figured out it was him. When my girlfriend and I learned about this, we decided to act. But we weren't going to just kick him out or flood his messages. No, she wanted to have some fun with it first. My girlfriend's plan was simple. She would pretend to be a naive new user and see if she could get Farmer Bob interested. Then we'd see just how far we could take this. She created a new screen name that made her sound young and inexperienced with the internet. She started participating in the chat using this new identity, and sure enough, Farmer Bob took the bait. He started whispering to her, trying to build rapport. My girlfriend played along perfectly, acting curious but uncertain, exactly the kind of target these predators look for. After some back and forth conversations over several days, we managed to extract some basic information about him. And then he started sharing personal details, probably trying to seem impressive or trustworthy. For example, we learned that he lived in a rural area of the country. He claimed to be wealthy because he owned a cattle farm, hence the nickname Farmer Bob that we gave him. As the conversations continued, we quickly realized something important. This guy was extremely stupid. And I don't mean that as an insult, I mean he genuinely seemed to lack basic social skills and education. His messages were poorly written, his logic didn't make sense, and he contradicted himself constantly. At one point, he actually bragged to my girlfriend about how he always wore wooden clogs, yes, wooden shoes, and how females supposedly loved being intimate with him while he wore them. This is a real thing he said, multiple times. My girlfriend and I were reading these messages together, barely able to contain our laughter. This guy was completely serious, thinking he was being charming or impressive. After a few more days of back and forth messages, my girlfriend decided she was bored with the slow approach. She told me, "Fuck it, let's just go all in." So she completely changed her strategy. She started pretending to be very interested in maybe meeting up with Farmer Bob in person for a hookup. But she added one condition. He needed to provide cocaine, because it always made her super horny. Now, we fully expected this to be where he'd back out or get suspicious. Asking someone to provide illegal drugs when you've only talked online for a few days. That should have been a massive red flag. But to our absolute surprise, he took the bait. However, he immediately admitted that he couldn't actually afford cocaine. Which was hilarious, because literally an hour earlier in the chat, he'd been bragging about being a wealthy cattle farm owner. And then he made another mistake. He told my girlfriend that his parents would be out of town the coming weekend, so that would be a good time to meet up. Wait, his parents? This dude had literally forgotten that he'd claimed to be the owner of the farm. He'd just accidentally revealed that he lived with his parents and didn't actually own anything. We realized at this point that we were dealing with someone who was not only a creep but also incredibly, almost impressively stupid. This is where my girlfriend decided to test just how far his stupidity went. She sent him a message that said something like, "But Farmer Bob, didn't you know that if you mix 3 parts baking soda with 1 part vanilla sugar, you get a rush equal to a cocaine rush, but with a nice vanilla aftertaste? It's way cheaper too." We thought this was so obviously fake, so absurdly over the top, that surely he would realize my girlfriend was trolling him. I mean, come on. Baking soda and vanilla sugar. That's literally baking ingredients. That's what you use to make cookies, not drugs. But instead of calling out the obvious lie, he responded enthusiastically. He told us he had forgotten about that DIY cocaine trick, and thanked my girlfriend for reminding him about it. We sat there staring at the screen in disbelief. This man actually believed that you could make cocaine out of baking soda and vanilla sugar. My girlfriend, committed to the bit, told him he needed to make a batch right away and test it before she would book a train ticket to visit him. She said she wanted to make sure it was good quality before she made the trip. He promised he would make a batch immediately and try it out that evening. We logged out of the chat, absolutely convinced that he would realize it was fake once he actually tried to snort baking soda. Surely, we thought, this is where it ends. There's no way he's actually going to do this. We didn't hear anything from Farmer Bob for a couple of days. We assumed he'd either figured out he'd been trolled, or he'd tried the recipe and realized it was just baking soda. But then, my girlfriend received an email written entirely in capital letters. The subject line was something like, "You tricked me," and the message itself was furious. The email said, "You made my nose bleed, you fucking bitch. I had to visit a clinic because of you." The email went on, accusing my girlfriend of tricking him, which, to be fair, she absolutely had, and describing how he'd snorted the mixture and his nose had started bleeding so badly that he'd had to go to a medical clinic. My girlfriend and I read this email together, and I have never in my life seen her laugh so hard. She was crying with laughter. This man had actually done it. He had actually mixed baking soda and vanilla sugar and snorted it like it was cocaine. And apparently, it had gone so badly that he needed medical attention. We sat there for a few minutes just processing this. We'd been joking around, trolling a creep for fun, and he'd actually sent himself to the hospital. At this point, any reasonable person would have stopped. The revenge was complete. The creep had literally harmed himself because of his own stupidity and predatory behavior. But my girlfriend looked at me and said, "You know what? I think we can make him do it again." I thought she was joking. Surely there was no way he'd fall for the same trick twice. He'd literally just gone to a clinic because of this. He was angry and knew he'd been tricked. But my girlfriend is, as I mentioned, more evil than the devil when she wants to be. She responded to his angry email with a message that said, essentially, "Oh my God, Farmer Bob, you must have gotten the mixture wrong. That's not supposed to happen. The ratio is really important. Are you sure you used exactly 3 parts baking soda to 1 part vanilla sugar?" And then, and this is where it gets truly absurd, she added to her backstory. She claimed that she used this cocaine all the time in her side gig, which was producing and starring in German amateur fetish pornography that she sold to tourists all over Europe. Specifically, she told him she starred in spanking videos. German spanking videos. There is no logical reason anyone should have believed this. It was completely ridiculous. But Farmer Bob didn't just believe it, he asked for proof. So my girlfriend decided to make him a trailer for her biggest hit film, which she titled Spanken mein Scheiß, which is intentionally terrible German that roughly translates to spanking my shit. She recruited her younger brother and his friend to help create this masterpiece of deception. Here's how the video worked. Her brother and his friend, both fully clothed, sat on my girlfriend's bed. The friend, who had long curly hair, laid across the brother's lap pretending to be my girlfriend. Her brother held a wooden spatula and pretended to spank his friend. Meanwhile, I stood behind the camera clapping my wet hands together to create the sound of spanking. My girlfriend and I shouted complete nonsense in fake German accents, and her brother and his friend moved their mouths like they were responding. The whole thing was ridiculous. It was obviously fake. The quality was terrible, the acting was non-existent, and the German we were speaking was just random sounds. But here's the thing. This was 1999. Internet video quality was already pretty bad. Compression artifacts, low resolution, choppy frame rates, all of that was normal. So our intentionally terrible video actually kind of looked like other amateur videos from that era. We sent this trailer to Farmer Bob, fully expecting him to finally realize he was being trolled. He didn't. He was completely convinced this was genuine German fetish pornography. He begged us to sell him copies of the full videos. My girlfriend, sensing an opportunity, told him she would sell him videos, but only if he tried the cocaine recipe again. She claimed he must have gotten the measurements wrong the first time, and that's why it hurt. She promised that if he did it correctly, it would work. After my girlfriend sent that message, we waited for Farmer Bob to respond. We waited for days, then a week, then 2 weeks. We never heard from him again. To this day, I don't know what happened. Maybe he finally realized he'd been trolled and was too embarrassed to respond. Maybe he tried the mixture again and ended up back at the clinic and learned his lesson. Maybe he moved on to harass people in different chat rooms under a different name. What I do know is that we never got another report from anyone in our community matching his email address or his tactics. He either stopped completely or moved on to other platforms. Now, I know what you're thinking. This story is too ridiculous to be true. You made this up. I wish I could show you proof, but unfortunately, the fake German spanking video was stored on an external hard drive that died about 7 years ago. I've been meaning to try to recover the data from it, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. So all I can offer you is my word that this story is completely true. Every absurd detail of it actually happened. My ex-girlfriend and I really did convince an internet predator to snort baking soda twice, sent him to a medical clinic, and then sold him on the idea that we produced amateur German fetish films. And honestly, he deserved every bit of it. This was someone who was actively targeting young women and girls in our community. He was a predator who took advantage of the lack of moderation and safety features in early internet spaces. Did we go too far? Maybe, but in that moment, in that era of the internet, this felt like justice. We protected our community, we got a predator to stop, and we had a hell of a story to tell. Looking back on this story more than 20 years later, there are a few things worth reflecting on. First, the early internet was genuinely dangerous in ways that younger people today might not fully understand. The complete lack of moderation, safety features, and accountability meant that predators could operate freely. We had to create our own safety systems and look out for each other. Second, sometimes creativity and humor can be powerful tools against bad people. We could have just reported Farmer Bob to, well, no one, actually, because there was no one to report him to. We could have just kicked him out of our community, but he would have just moved on to the next chat room. Instead, we humiliated him so thoroughly that he disappeared entirely. Third, never underestimate the power of human stupidity. We created the most obviously fake scenarios possible, and he believed all of it. Sometimes people really are that gullible. And finally, this story is a reminder of how much the internet has changed. Today, this kind of unmoderated, anonymous space would be shut down immediately. There are laws, regulations, and safety features designed to prevent exactly this kind of predatory behavior. But back then, it was the Wild West. And sometimes, you had to take justice into your own hands. So that's the story of how my ex-girlfriend and I convinced a creep to snort baking soda. Twice. Do I feel bad about it? Not even a little bit. This was someone who was actively harassing vulnerable people in our community. He was a predator who thought he could act without consequences because the internet was anonymous and unmoderated. We showed him there were consequences. Just not the kind he expected. Would I do this today? Probably not. The internet is different now, and there are better systems in place for dealing with harassment and predatory behavior. But back then, in 1999, in the unmoderated chaos of early chat rooms, this was how we protected ourselves and our friends. And honestly, it's still one of the funniest and most satisfying revenge stories I've ever been part of. So what do you think? Did we go too far, or did this creep get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story from the Wild West days of the internet, hit that subscribe button for more revenge tales that'll make you glad the internet has at least some rules now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.